The cameras flashed as the courtroom lights dimmed into a single white beam, settling on the long mahogany bench where Judge Merrick Garland sat, calm, poised, and silent. Opposite him stood Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, her fire barely contained behind her eyes. The crowd wasn't here for a trial. They were here for a reckoning, a face-off between justice and politics itself. The narrator's voice cut through the murmurs like a blade. It began as a hearing. It became a war of worlds, one where the robe met rebellion, and the system trembled under the weight of truth. Judge Garland's reputation preceded him, the measured voice of the judiciary, a man who had served decades in the Department of Justice before ascending to the upper echelons of power. Yet today, his calm demeanor looked tested. Crockett, fierce and unapologetic, carried the fury of those who felt silenced by politics masquerading as law. The topic that day, where does justice end and politics begin? A simple question, but one that no one had dared to answer under oath. Garland's tone was neutral, almost academic, as he opened the proceedings. Congresswoman Crockett, this forum is not about blame, it is about balance. The courts must remain free of influence even from passionate voices such as yours. But Crockett leaned forward, her voice slicing through his restraint. With all due respect, Judge, that balance doesn't exist. The scales were rigged long before I stepped into this room. A murmur spread across the hall. The audience leaned closer. The narrator continued, almost whispering over the rising tension. And just like that, the first shot was fired, not from malice but from conviction. Garland adjusted his glasses, visibly composed, but inwardly bracing himself. If you claim the system is broken, then tell us, Congresswoman, what evidence do you have? Or is this another performance for the cameras? Crockett's eyes narrowed. Cameras, no, Judge, this is about accountability. You sit in judgment, yet you were appointed through politics. Every robe, every bench, every gavel, all drawn from the same well of power, don't you? Tell me justice is pure when it drinks from that source. The room erupted with gasps and whispers. Garland raised his hand, demanding silence, but his voice trembled slightly when he spoke again. So, you're suggesting the judiciary is corrupt, that every decision we make is political theater? Not every decision, she replied, her tone fierce but clear. Just the ones that decide who gets to matter in this country. A silence followed that could have cracked stone. The narrator's voice grew heavier, the atmosphere electric. In that pause, the courtroom stopped breathing. It wasn't just a debate, it was an autopsy of the American soul. Garland leaned forward. Congresswoman, you speak with passion, but passion is not proof. The courts are built on law, precedent, principle, and process. If politics infects justice, then where does your own influence stand? You're a politician. Crockett smirked slightly, but there was pain beneath it. I am, and that's exactly why I can see the infection from the inside. The exchange turned sharp, personal. Each word from Garland landed like a gavel, each reply from Crockett like thunder. The crowd, lawmakers, journalists, and ordinary citizens felt the air thicken. Justice without empathy is tyranny, Crockett declared. Politics without justice is chaos. So tell me, Judge Garland, which side are you on? Garland's hands tightened on the bench. He didn't answer immediately. His silence spoke louder than any words. The narrator filled that gap. For the first time, the man known for his composure looked shaken, not by insult, but by truth. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, deliberate. You want to draw a line between justice and politics, Congresswoman. I say that line is called integrity, and it's drawn by those who choose to act with it or without it. It was a statement that silenced even Crockett for a moment. She tilted her head, studying him. Integrity is easy to preach from the bench, harder to live when the decisions destroy lives. Tell that to the families who waited for justice that never came because the system was balancing politics. The tension snapped like a live wire. Reporters scribbled. Garland's jaw tensed. "Are you accusing this court of moral failure?" "No, Judge," she replied coldly. "I'm accusing it of moral convenience." The narrator's voice dropped to a near whisper, and there it was, the blow that drew blood, not from flesh, but from faith. Garland exhaled sharply. "You want revolution, you want chaos, but if you destroy faith in the system, what remains? The law is imperfect, yes, but it's all that stands between us and anarchy." Crockett took a step closer to the microphone. "No, Judge. It's not faith I want to destroy, it's the illusion. Justice can't be sacred if it's selective." Every word struck like a verdict. The judge looked down for a long moment, as if weighing the centuries of jurisprudence behind his robe. Then, in a tone that carried the weight of history, he replied, "Then perhaps, Congresswoman, the real question isn't where justice ends and politics begins. It's whether we can still tell the difference." The audience froze. The narrator's voice returned, rising with intensity. It was no longer a hearing. It was a mirror reflecting everything the nation had become, divided, disillusioned, desperate for clarity. The gavel struck once, but even that sound felt uncertain. "We'll continue this discussion," Garland announced. Tomorrow, the crowd erupted in murmurs as cameras clicked. Reporters rushed out, and Crockett turned away, her face unreadable but victorious in silence. Garland remained seated, staring into the void between law and belief. In that silence, the narrator concluded, the question still hung in the air, unanswered, untamed, and unending. Where does justice end and politics begin? The screen faded to black. The music swelled. The debate had only begun. The next morning, the courtroom felt different. The same wooden benches, the same flags, the same faces, but the air was heavier, charged with the echo of what had happened the day before. The headlines had already named it, "The Clash of Justice and Politics." The narrator's voice came slow and deliberate, carrying the tension of the crowd. When the gavel fell yesterday, the truth didn't end, it hid. But today, it was back on trial. Judge Merrick Garland entered the chamber quietly. His face was unreadable, yet there was a tension in the lines around his eyes, a storm waiting beneath the calm. Jasmine Crockett was already there, standing by the podium like a soldier awaiting another battle. The media lights hit her face, glinting off the determination in her eyes. Garland spoke first. "Congresswoman Crockett, this hearing resumes not as an argument, but as an inquiry into something deeper, what justice means when everyone claims to own it." Crockett folded her arms. "Justice doesn't belong to anyone, Judge, but somehow it always seems to serve someone." The crowd murmured. The judge leaned forward. "You're implying manipulation, corruption even. That's a serious charge." "So is silence," she shot back. "And the system's been silent for decades." The narrator's tone hardened. It wasn't anger anymore. It was something purer. Two believers fighting over the same God. Garland's hands clasped together. "You speak as if justice were a weapon, Congresswoman, but it is a shield." Crockett's laugh was bitter, sharp. "A shield for who, Judge? The powerful, the connected. Every time that gavel drops, someone without power loses." Garland's voice dropped, quiet but piercing. "You think I don't know injustice. I've seen it in the eyes of victims, the hands of the accused. The system fails, yes, but abandoning it means surrendering to chaos." She stepped closer. I'm not asking to abandon it. I'm asking to rebuild it. You talk about law like it's sacred, but laws were written by men. Men with agendas, men who looked like you, not me. Gasps filled the room. Garland froze. Crockett's words struck the deepest fault line of American justice, race, privilege, and power. The narrator's voice carried a heavy rhythm, and there it was, the truth behind the debate. This wasn't about theory anymore. It was about history bleeding into the present. Garland's tone softened unexpectedly. You think I don't see the bias, Congresswoman? I do. I've watched the same system punish the poor and excuse the privileged. But you can't burn down the courthouse because some of its walls are cracked. Crockett's reply was swift, cutting. No, Judge, but you can't keep pretending the foundation isn't sinking. She paused, letting the silence sting. You call it justice. I call it selective mercy. For a moment Garland said nothing. His expression shifted, less defensive now, more reflective. The narrator's voice lowered. In that silence, something human flickered in the judge's eyes. A man caught between what is right and what is real. Garland finally spoke. Do you know why I became a judge, Congresswoman? Not for power, not for prestige, for order. Because I believed if men followed the law, the world could make sense. Crockett's gaze didn't waver. And what happens when the law itself stops making sense? Garland didn't answer immediately. The question lingered like smoke. Then, unexpectedly, he turned the challenge back. Tell me, Congresswoman, when you vote on legislation, do you act from justice or politics? The room fell silent again. Reporters leaned forward, ready. Crockett's lips parted, but she hesitated just long enough for the narrator to cut in. He had flipped the scales. The accuser had become the accused. Crockett finally answered, I act for the people, always. Garland leaned in. Then you act politically, because the people are not one, they are divided. Every decision favors some and harms others. That's politics. That's power. Justice, on the other hand, doesn't choose sides. Maybe that's the problem, she said sharply. Justice that doesn't choose sides can't protect anyone. A deep murmur rippled through the chamber. Garland's brow furrowed. Justice must transcend sides, Congresswoman. Otherwise, it becomes vengeance. And what's wrong with vengeance when the guilty keep walking free? She demanded. The air turned electric again. The judge's tone hardened. Because vengeance is born of pain, not reason, and pain blinds. Crockett's voice cracked, but only slightly, just enough for the audience to feel the emotion under the steel. Tell that to the mothers who have buried their sons because the law turned away. Tell them about reason, Judge. The words hit him like a confession. He sat back, silent. The narrator's tone softened, almost mournful. Her voice wasn't anger anymore. It was history speaking through her. And for the first time, Garland didn't have an answer. Finally, the judge stood. You believe justice should feel, not think. That's dangerous. Crockett looked up, defiant. No, Judge. I believe justice should see. The crowd gasped again. Garland turned away, pacing slowly across the bench, hands behind his back, the image of authority wrestling with doubt. Do you really think the courts can't change? He asked quietly. They won't change, she said. Not until they stop pretending they're above the fight. The narrator's voice grew intense again. It was no longer debate, it was revelation. A courtroom turned confession booth. Two souls, one bound by law, the other by truth, standing in the ruins of their own ideals. Garland returned to his seat, eyes fixed on her. You want to rewrite the meaning of justice, Congresswoman. But if everyone does that, we lose the one thing that holds this country together. Maybe, she said softly, but if that thing only holds some of us, maybe it deserves to break. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Garland stared at her, not in anger, but in something far deeper understanding. "You're not wrong," he said finally, "but neither am I. The problem is truth doesn't live in one place anymore." The narrator's final line echoed through the chamber as the gavel struck, and with that sound the world outside began to listen. The debate wasn't ending. It was spreading beyond the courtroom, beyond the cameras, into the conscience of a nation. The third day dawned, gray and uneasy, as if the sky itself had been listening. Outside the courthouse, protesters gathered, half chanting Crockett's name, half defending the judge. The air buzzed with tension. America was watching, divided, yet united by curiosity. What would happen when law and truth collided one last time? Inside, the camera lights hummed. The narrator's voice returned, low, reflective, heavy with foreboding. By the third day, this was no longer a debate. It was a confession wrapped in argument, a nation's conscience on trial. Judge Merrick Garland sat in silence, hands clasped, eyes lowered. Overnight, he had become both symbol and suspect, the embodiment of a question he could no longer answer. Across from him, Jasmine Crockett waited. Her fire was still there, but today it burned differently, calmer, colder, focused. Garland spoke first, his voice measured but hollow. "Congresswoman, yesterday you accused this institution of moral convenience. You weren't wrong, but I ask you now, do you fight for justice or revenge?" Crockett's response came with a strange stillness. "I fight because someone has to, because every time justice bends to politics, another life gets erased." He looked at her closely. "Whose life are you really fighting for?" A ripple of silence. The crowd leaned in. The narrator whispered, it wasn't a question, it was a strike. Garland had sensed something beneath her fury, and now he was reaching for it. Crockett exhaled. For the first time, her voice trembled slightly. "My brother," she said quietly. "He was arrested for something he didn't do. The case went to a federal court. The judge followed procedure, ignored evidence, and my brother spent years behind bars before anyone cared to reopen it. He died there. Justice didn't end, it disappeared." The courtroom froze. Even Garland's stoic face faltered. "I didn't know," he said softly. "Of course you didn't," she replied. "The system doesn't remember the names it destroys." The narrator's tone turned mournful, and there it was, the origin of her fire, the wound beneath the voice. This wasn't politics. It was pain disguised as principle. Garland sat back, visibly shaken. "You think I can't understand loss. You think I haven't seen lives destroyed by the same machinery I serve." His tone cracked, the mask of the judge slipping away. "I've sentenced men who begged for mercy. I've watched truth twisted until it choked itself. Don't think I haven't asked myself whether I've become part of the rot." Crockett's eyes softened for a moment, but only a moment. "Then why stay silent?" she asked. "Because if every judge starts shouting, there's no law left. Only noise," Garland replied. The narrator's voice cut through, trembling with emotion. It was no longer an argument. It was a mirror. Two people staring into the same abyss, seeing themselves reflected in the other's pain. Crockett leaned forward. "You call it noise, Judge. I call it awakening. If truth makes the system tremble, then maybe it deserves to fall." Garland's voice rose for the first time. "Fall into what? Chaos, rule by passion, the same anger that built mobs and tore nations apart." "Anger didn't tear nations apart," Crockett shot back. "Injustice did, and the silence that followed it." Applause broke from one corner of the room, quickly silenced by the gavel. The crowd was no longer an audience. It was a battlefield. Garland stood, pacing slowly, his voice lowering again. "Do you know what the hardest part of justice is, Congresswoman? It's not deciding who's right, it's knowing that sometimes no one is." The line hung heavy in the air. Then, maybe justice shouldn't be about right or wrong anymore, she replied. Maybe it should be about repair. Garland stopped walking. His eyes met hers with something almost tender. Sadness, maybe even respect. Repair requires trust, he said. And trust requires restraint. If every verdict becomes political, then every truth becomes negotiable. Crockett took a deep breath. Then maybe we've already lost that trust, Judge. Maybe the people stopped believing long before I started speaking. The narrator's tone grew grim. Her words struck like thunder because everyone in the room knew she was right. The people had stopped believing. The system no longer inspired. It intimidated. Garland sat down, his voice quieter now, almost weary. You remind me of the young attorneys I used to mentor, idealists who thought justice was a clean fight. And what did you tell them? She asked that justice isn't clean, it's compromise. Crockett shook her head slowly. No, that's how injustice hides, inside compromise. The camera lights caught her face, her expression unflinching, her voice trembling with moral fire. You say you serve order, Judge, but order without fairness isn't peace, it's control, the kind that keeps people quiet until they explode. Garland looked down. He had no rebuttal this time. The narrator's tone softened again, and there it was, the rarest thing in any courtroom, surrender not of victory but of illusion. Garland finally looked up. Maybe you're right, he said quietly. Maybe I've spent too long guarding a system that forgot who it serves. But tell me, Congresswoman, if you destroy faith in it, what replaces it? Crockett's voice softened too, but her conviction didn't fade. Not destruction, Judge, transformation. Maybe justice doesn't belong to robes or courts anymore. Maybe it belongs to those who still believe it can change. The crowd murmured again, some nodding, some frowning, all transfixed. Garland stared at her for a long moment, then whispered almost to himself, and what if belief isn't enough? Crockett smiled faintly. Then we keep believing anyway. The gavel struck, echoing through the hall. But this time no one moved. Garland looked at her, then at the crowd, and finally at the flag behind him. We'll adjourn for today, he said, voice distant. But maybe we should start listening, not judging. The narrator's voice returned as the camera panned across their faces, the judge, weary but awakened. Crockett, fierce yet vulnerable. On that day, the courtroom didn't deliver a verdict. It delivered a reckoning. Justice and politics had collided, and in the wreckage, something fragile was born. Understanding. The music swelled. The screen faded to black, but the question still burned. Can understanding survive when power demands silence? The gavel's echo lingered as the credits rolled. The morning after the third hearing, Washington no longer whispered, it roared. News anchors replayed every word, every glare, every pause between Judge Garland and Congresswoman Crockett. Headlines split down the middle. Garland's grace under fire on one side, Crockett exposes the truth on the other. The narrator's voice carried through the chaos, steady and grave. It was no longer about two people. It was about two nations staring at each other through the same cracked mirror. Outside the courthouse, protest banners flapped in the wind. One read, "Justice belongs to the people." Another, "Protect the bench." The steps of the court had become a battleground of slogans, and somewhere between them stood the question neither side could answer. Garland under siege inside his chambers. Judge Garland sat alone. The blinds were drawn. The light was thin. A folder of letters from the public lay unopened on his desk, some praising his restraint, others calling him a coward. He rubbed his temples. For decades he had believed that silence was strength. Now it felt like surrender. The narrator murmured. He had spent a lifetime building walls of principle, but Crockett's words had found the cracks. A knock on the door. His clerk entered quietly, setting down a newspaper. The headline read, Garland's neutrality questioned. Has justice lost its voice? He sighed. They want blood? He muttered. They want clarity, sir, the clerk replied. Garland stared at the scales carved into his desk. Suddenly they seemed unbalanced. Crockett's ascent across town. Crockett stood before a crowd on the Capitol steps. Cameras framed her against the marble pillars as her voice thundered through the mic. Justice doesn't need silence. It needs courage. We can't let the robe become a shield for the comfortable while the powerless drown beneath it. The crowd roared. Reporters swarmed. Overnight, she had become more than a congresswoman. She was a movement. But when the chants faded and the cameras turned away, her expression changed. She looked down at a small silver locket in her hand, the one that had belonged to her brother. I hope you're watching, she whispered. I hope this means something. The narrator's tone softened. Fame had found her, but peace had not. Every cheer sounded like an echo of the justice she never received. The nation divides in coffee shops, classrooms, and living rooms. The debate raged. Was Crockett a hero or a rebel? Was Garland principled or afraid? Talk shows turned their words into ammunition. Panelists dissected every sentence like evidence in a trial that never ended. For the first time in years, the narrator said, the country wasn't arguing about policy. It was arguing about morality. In Congress, whispers grew. Some accused Crockett of destabilizing public trust. Others hailed her as the conscience Washington had lost. Garland, meanwhile, faced mounting pressure from judicial peers. Letters from fellow judges urged him to restore order and defend the sanctity of the bench. He read them all, but one line stuck in his mind. If you let emotion win, the law dies. He closed the letter and stared at the empty courtroom through the glass window. The benches sat waiting, silent witnesses to his doubt. A call he didn't expect late one night. Garland's office phone rang. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar yet heavy with conviction. Judge Garland, the caller said, "This is Jasmine Crockett." He froze. For a long moment, neither spoke. "I didn't expect to hear from you," he finally said. "I'm not calling to fight," she replied. "Tomorrow's the final hearing. Before we face each other again, I need you to know this isn't about destroying you." Her voice wavered slightly. "I don't see enemies, Judge. I see barriers, and you're one of the few who can move them." Garland's tone softened. "Barriers keep things standing, Congresswoman. Without them, the roof collapses." "Maybe," she answered. "But when the roof's already falling on people, you don't fix it by pretending it's fine." There was silence, then a quiet chuckle from Garland. "You speak like a poet, not a politician. And you, Judge," she said, "sound like a man who's tired of pretending he doesn't care." The line clicked off. The narrator whispered. That night, both of them stared at the same city through different windows, each wondering if they'd been fighting the other or themselves. The eve of reckoning by dawn, the courthouse was surrounded. News vans lined the streets. Commentators called it the hearing of the century. Inside, the air crackled with anticipation. Reporters whispered, activists held signs, even the marble columns seemed to lean in. The narrator's tone deepened, cinematic. It was no longer just a question of where justice ends. It was whether it had ever truly begun. Garland arrived early, his robe immaculate but his expression distant. He looked at the empty judge's chair and, for the first time, seemed unsure he deserved it. Crockett entered moments later, calm but heavy-eyed. She glanced toward the bench, then at the gallery packed with ordinary citizens who had waited hours for seats. Their eyes met, neither smiled, neither blinked, the whisper before the storm just before the hearing began. Garland leaned toward the clerk. "No interruptions today, no decorum warnings, let it unfold." The clerk hesitated. "Sir, that could get out of hand." "So be it," Garland said. "The truth's been polite long enough." The gavel struck once hard, resonant, final. Garland's opening words echoed through the chamber. "Today we conclude this inquiry. We will not speak as judge and Congresswoman, but as citizens of a system both of us have served and questioned. Let the record show that this hearing is for history, not headlines." The crowd hushed. Crockett stepped forward. "Then let's make history honest," and with that, the stage was set. The narrator's closing words swelled like the build-up before a storm. 3 days of fire had led to this, the moment when ideals would collide for the last time. Outside, thunder rolled through the city like a warning. Inside, 2 voices prepared to test whether truth could survive power. The camera panned upward toward the courthouse seal, its Latin motto gleaming, "Fiat justitia ruat caelum." Let justice be done though the heavens fall. Tomorrow, the narrator said, the heavens would fall. The morning of the final hearing arrived beneath a heavy sky. Reporters clustered outside the courthouse before sunrise, their breath visible in the chill. Inside, the courtroom hummed with quiet dread. Nobody spoke loudly. Even the sound of footsteps seemed cautious, as if everyone knew something irreversible was about to happen. The narrator's voice slid in low and steady. For 4 days the nation had listened to words. Today it would listen to what was left when words failed. Judge Merrick Garland entered without fanfare. His robe hung a little looser, his shoulders heavier. He took his seat and looked across the room to Jasmine Crockett, who stood waiting, her notes untouched on the podium. She didn't need them. Neither of them did any more. He cleared his throat, his voice quiet but clear. This proceeding was meant to examine the boundary between justice and politics. It has become something else, a mirror, perhaps, or a confession, but it must end, Congresswoman, it must. Crockett nodded slowly. "It should end, Judge, but not the way it began. You said law is what keeps chaos away. Maybe, but sometimes the law itself is the chaos." The crowd stirred. The judge didn't respond immediately. His gaze drifted to the spectators, the students, the lawyers, the ordinary people filling every seat. "And if I admit that," he asked finally, "if I admit that law can be cruel, that politics can poison it, what then?" Her answer came almost as a whisper. "Then maybe we stop pretending we can separate them. Maybe we start asking who they serve." He leaned forward, elbows on the bench. "You want truth? Here it is. Every decision I've ever made carried the fingerprints of politics, whether I wanted them there or not. The appointment, the expectations, the eyes that watched me. I wanted to believe I could rise above it." He hesitated, voice breaking slightly. "But you were right, Congresswoman. No one rises above what they're standing on." A silence spread through the room like a tide. Crockett's expression softened. "That's not weakness, Judge. That's honesty." He nodded faintly. "Honesty doesn't save systems. It only exposes them." She took a slow breath. "Then let exposure be the start. You said integrity draws the line between justice and politics. Maybe today, integrity means erasing that line." The air shifted. The mood in the room deepened. The narrator spoke over the stillness. This was no longer debate. It was the surrender of armor. 2 opponents stripping away everything except the truth they both feared. Garland's tone changed lower, rower. "You think change begins with confrontation. Maybe you're right, but confrontation without patience builds fires that can't be controlled." He looked up at her. "Would you burn everything to light the path?" Her answer was immediate. "If it means the next generation doesn't have to live in the dark, yes." The audience erupted in murmurs. The gavel struck once, but Garland didn't ask for silence. He simply waited until the noise faded on its own. "Your brother," he said gently. He would be proud, but he might also ask, "What do we do after the fire?" Crockett blinked away a tear. "We rebuild," she said, "together, judges, politicians, citizens, not from authority but from accountability." Garland rose from his chair. His robe caught the light, casting long shadows across the courtroom wall. "You've given me something to consider, Congresswoman. I've served the law my entire life. Today, I wonder if I've truly served justice." Crockett stepped back, voice trembling with quiet conviction. Then maybe this hearing wasn't about ending anything. Maybe it was about beginning again. The two stood facing each other, neither triumphant nor defeated. The narrator's voice came softer now, carrying a weight that felt like closure. In that moment, the debate lost its audience and found its purpose. It wasn't about winning. It was about remembering why the fight mattered. Garland looked toward the seal above the bench. The words carved there, "Fiat Justicia Ruat Caelum," seemed heavier now. He turned back to her. "Let justice be done, though the heavens fall," he said quietly. "Perhaps they already have." Crockett's expression gentled. "Then let's rebuild under open sky." The gavel struck once more. There was no applause, no verdict. Reporters hesitated to move, unsure if the story was over, or if something larger had just begun. Garland stepped down from the bench, walking past Crockett without ceremony, but when he reached the door, he paused. "Congresswoman," he said without turning around, "you asked where justice ends and politics begins. I think maybe they end in the same place, inside us." She didn't answer. She just watched him leave, her hand resting on the locket at her neck. The cameras captured the moment, but the sound that stayed was not the click of shutters. It was the faint echo of footsteps fading down a marble hall. Outside, the storm had broken. Rain lashed against the courthouse steps, washing away chalked slogans, blurring signs and faces alike. People stood under umbrellas, silent, thoughtful. Some felt defeated, others inspired, all changed. The narrator's closing voice filled the air like rain itself. There was no winner that day, only witnesses to a truth too old to ignore and too new to define. Justice and politics had met, argued, and recognized themselves in each other, and somewhere beyond the walls of the court, the country listened. Lightning flashed across the Capitol dome. Crockett stepped outside into the storm, unafraid. For the first time, Garland did the same. They didn't speak, didn't look at each other, but in that shared silence, something fragile but real began, the idea that truth, once spoken, doesn't need permission to live. The screen faded to black. Justice doesn't end. The narrator whispered, "It evolves."